Hey everyone, I recently became a career coach and interview prep. So I was actually part of an information session this morning. Some folks said they couldn't join, wanted to record a video just to give them the highlights. Background on me, I actually started off my career in the US Air Force. I was working in procurement for IT systems, communication systems. After coming out as a captain, I went into consulting with Accenture and then really wanted to try and stay on a project longer because in consulting there's a lot of different engagements. You don't get to see something all the way through its life cycle. That's when I took on a role over at YouTube and Google, where I was a primary data center capacity planner for about 2.5 years, ordering machines to support all of the YouTube videos and cat videos. Since then, I actually went over to cruise automation, working in autonomous vehicles, but wanted to round myself out a little bit more by working in product. So then I found myself at Airbnb. Now, during part of this journey, I came across Exponent. It's actually through a good friend of mine, Jeff Lee, who at the time was interviewing me for a role at Autodesk. So him and I met a couple years ago, but he put me in touch with Steven. That's how I've sort of gotten into the role of submitting content and also being a coach with Exponent. I think it's really awesome what we're building there in creating a community for technical program managers. You see online a lot of prep for product management. That's what a lot of people in my MBA program are going after, and we just don't see a lot of emphasis on TPM, so I'm really excited to be part of this. So I want to go over two things. One is sort of every time people see my background, they ask, like, what are the tips for getting into FANG? And secondly, I'm going to go over some common mistakes that people make just generically in their job search. The first thing I'd say with big companies is they're not typically looking for switchers. So you already have a domain expertise, a domain specialty, and I actually recommend most people stay laser focused on that. Know sort of what your expertise is and make sure that's what you're bringing to the Googles and the Facebooks. It's really tough sometimes to try and change a discipline or change sectors when you're doing the large company interviews. The second is sort of this ability to attack ambiguity and be in uncomfortable situations. For example, my first Google interview on-site question was, hey, we're going to build a product. You're going to pick it now and you're going to just talk me through how we're going to launch it. And they sort of just let me guide and steer the conversation myself. It wasn't something I was ready for. It's kind of difficult to prepare for an interview question like that, but it's really this whole theme of be able to go after anything, whatever is put in front of you. The next I'd say is sort of like know and review your criteria. So Google specifically, they tell you up front what we're going to look at is leadership communication, your cognitive ability and your role-related knowledge, and finally Googliness. So I'd really go over whatever criteria the HR member gives to you and see how you fit into that and which areas are like confusing that you want to spend more time on. Some common mistakes I see is when people are reaching out and looking for help with interview support, they always go and ask, like, hey, you finished a loop recently, like, what are the specific questions you were asked? And I feel like that's actually not always very productive. Instead of trying to go after and try and find and guess the questions that someone's going to ask you, instead focus on the categories, which is for technical program managers would be program management. So your estimation and ambiguous questions, system design, and then obviously the behavioral and values check. So know what your strengths are in that area, know what your experiences are, and just double down on that. Also with this is, when you're preparing for an interview, you prep your 3 or 5 stories or experiences and be able to try and adapt those to different circumstances. Give 2 sample questions, which is like, give me an example of something you've launched before, or how would you design X? In some ways, these are actually quite similar questions. Like at the surface level, they feel very different. But if you talk about something that you've done, worked on, and built before, you can kind of adapt that for both of these types of questions. And then another thing would be sort of how do you conduct your company research? So my initial thought on how you do research is, okay, I'm going to go online, read a couple of recent news articles. I'm going to know what this company is doing. But how about we go another layer deeper, which is like, what are some assumptions that the company is making that may not be right today? So I use Airbnb, for example. After COVID hit, we took a big hit in the business. And the question was sort of like, when would this come back? What is it going to look like? Obviously, a lot of people dealing with a lot of different situations there. But what are some assumptions that happen when crises happen? And how does the company and how would you team and how would you react? And sort of apply that to whatever company you're talking to. Obviously, everything that's going on is affecting people differently, but yeah, 2020 was a big and very changing year. So yeah, along with this is, we prioritize certain projects in time of crises, but what do you deprioritize? We're seeing a lot of projects and even some companies losing funding now, and sort of what is going to be the model going forward. But yeah, think about all these different scenarios for whatever company that you're targeting. When you're looking at joining a company too, like what do people like and love about the product? Do you use the product yourself? You probably should be using it because you want to be able to talk about that experience, and also just be able to ingrain and have a good mental model when you're going through the interviews about like what's important to them. And yeah, also with this is like, what is the company doing that's sort of bigger and better than anybody else? What's actually protecting them, making sure that they have some sort of strategic advantage, knowing what that is, and being able to sort of use that as a lever when you're talking through your interview process. The other part I always think is missing is just being able to look up and know what the company mission is. Yeah, so when you look at a company like Apple, when their mission is to bring personal computing products to support students, educators, designers, scientists, I mean, that makes so much sense in what their day-to-day job is like in trying to build these really awesome and near perfect products for everyone to use. And let's think about Google now being able to organize all the world's information into something that's useful, and Airbnb's creating this sense of belonging for anybody to belong anywhere. And yeah, I think sometimes is overlooked, and people really have to look at company missions to know what you're going to be part of. I mean, working full time, you're 40 plus hours a week. What are you really dedicating yourselves to? What are you committing to? Yeah, I mean, overall, I just have a recommendation. It's always good to be interviewing. It's always good to be reaching out to people. Definitely help build the exponent community here, and feel free to Slack me directly if you have questions. After the info session, we actually had a couple of really good questions. I wanted to bring some of them to the forefront here and try and answer them too. One of them was a candidate was going through the hiring process, and they're sort of getting interviewed again and again, but not really making it to the next step. They're seeing more and more follow-ons. And yeah, I think what's happening there is there's specifically one area of expertise that the interviewers aren't seeing, something that the recruiter is trying to put the package together, but they're seeing that that's missing. I mean, the advice there really is look at all the things that you've already told them, but look at the job description again and see if you can really address whatever that shortcoming is. Obviously, this person is probably interviewing positively and a good signal. That's why they keep getting those calls back. But to get to the next step, you have to address whatever that shortcoming is head on. The second is we're seeing this type of hiring practice a little bit more now when the company is not hiring for a targeted role, but instead it's hired a generic job description and they bring you into a pool. I mean, the important thing to know there is, yes, you have to go through all the initial steps even to get hired into that initial pool. And then even once you're in the pool, you start meeting directly with hiring managers for a team placement. I actually think this is, a little bit similar to the consulting model where you can be hired in onto the bench or onto the beach. And then once you're actually staffed and they've onboarded you, you still have to look for a project to get onto and actually begin working on project work. So yeah, just seeing this trend in large companies now. The third question I got was around system design and sort of how deep do you go? Do you, like some of the videos on the website really go into really good detail? And the question is more like, hey, do we go that deep in an interview, or do we just sort of lay things out? I would say there's different approaches, right? Like when you start telling and talking about the system and the architecture, maybe you take a moment there and say, hey, this is how I'd break down each subcomponent, happy to go into each one in more depth. Or another approach is you put out sort of that large scaffolding up front, put it in front of the interviewer and say like, oh yeah, this is like basically how it is, and I have some ideas how to improve it. And what you're doing then is you're actually creating a conversation where you can build upon what you've already presented. You can go even more in depth. Yeah, I think that's all I have for today. It was really great seeing everyone. I think there are about 15 people on the call or so, and happy to meet with anybody here. Please feel free to message me, and good luck interviewing and good luck prepping.